hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. That would have been an interesting meeting in silence. Okay, so this is the Board of Finance regular audit subcommittee meeting, Tuesday, December 1st, 6 o'clock via WebEx. It's a regular meeting, so I'd like to call it to order. And if it's okay with everyone, we will wait for the Pledge of Allegiance to the regular Board of Finance meeting. Okay. So we will go on to item number 3, to hear and discuss an update report of the status of the work completed for the annual audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020 by Mr. Joseph Centofani. I see Mr. Centofani has joined us. Welcome, Joe.
Hello.
I understand that the audit is a little bit behind schedule, and so we thought it would be appropriate for you to give us a brief update and tell us where we are and when we should expect it, and then if we have any questions.
Okay. All right, so the audit is about 90% complete. The draft is about 90% complete. We're missing 2 items. One is the for OPEB for the Board of Education plan. We do not have that report from the actuary, and that's going to affect a lot of the top statements, a lot of the footnotes. We have the town and police, which we got on Monday, but we do not have the Board of Ed plan yet. So I know Kaylin is aware that we're waiting for that, and she'll send it when she gets it, but we haven't received it as of right now. The other item that we need is some student activity fund information from the Board of Education. So I did talk with Doreen earlier, and she said that I would have that information by the end of the week. So ideally, I'll get the 75, GASB 75, the OPEB information this week also. That we'll be able to finish up the draft, go through my review, and my subject to that timing, I should be able to get hopefully a draft by the end of the week. If it's not the end of the week, it would be the following Monday at the latest.
Okay. And is there anything we can help you with in speeding up getting the reports, or it's just the actuaries are still working on the OPEB report?
Yeah, I mean, they got the other 2 done, which are a lot more complicated because the Board of Ed plan doesn't have any assets. So I'm not sure why Board of Ed is last, unless it was the timing of when they received information.
Okay.
So, unfortunately, this has happened like the last several years, but this has kind of been the last piece. So I guess I'm going to say on a go-forward basis, to kind of get the actuaries to commit to like a November 1, again, subject to the town getting them what they need, but it needs to kind of be earlier. And again, I have 6 audits that are done waiting for this information. So this is not uncommon, but
okay,
it's kind of been a widespread problem. And of course, COVID has made it a little bit worse because it's even a little bit more delayed than the prior years. And then there are, which again, I think we asked for a response date of today. So there are some attorney letters that we'll need before we can issue, but we have time to chase those. So once I get you a draft, then I will maybe usually ask the finance director or Kaylin or someone from finance to follow up with the attorneys if we hadn't received a response from them yet. So, but since today was the response date, we'll give them a couple more days, and then we'll follow up because we'll need those back before we can issue. So we're in good shape. It's just these last few things. Again, everything on our end is kind of caught up, just waiting for these few things. And then in my review.
Okay. Were there any surprises that you found or anything unusual, or Anything we should know about?
I don't know about any surprises. I guess one of the things that I might point out is I think the internal service fund had a pretty good year, so some of that I think is timing, because COVID did affect people going to the doctors the last quarter. So again, look, the operations will look pretty good at June 30, but you probably need to look at them, considering the first quarter, because I think there's going to be a lot of claims that got heard after year end versus during the last quarter of the year. There's nothing else that really jumps out as far as any surprises or anything else. We did affect the adjustment just this week to move whatever funds that were left over to the two OPEB plans, so that when you get the draft, you'll see that kind of was affected. So you'll see the budgetary statement comes out just with a slight increase, which Moody's really likes to see something positive on the bottom line. So it's like $2. But on the GAAP basis, because of encumbrances and the timing of that's going to show a higher number. But on the budgetary basis, we pretty much maxed it out to get it over to those funds. And so that'll be like a receivable and a payable in those funds. But other than that, I mean, I think the expectations of where the budget came out and the Board of Ed did have a positive variance, so we expected a 214, which was expected. But I can't say there are any surprises right now. It's kind of for those few items of what we expected. I mean, I do see, looking at the pension funds, that they are showing some losses. So I have to. There was some decrease in market value, and the benefits are basically higher than what you're putting in by a pretty good amount. So both pension trust funds went down by about $5 million each, but the OPEB funds they're up. One's up 3.5, the other one's up. Police and fire up $5 million. But so again, just looking at the pension funds, and again, you did have a fair value decrease of about $3 million and 2.5 for employees and fire. The cash-wise, the total going in is about $6 million for employees, but benefits and expenses are about $12.3 million. And again, that's just kind of where you're at with those. And same with police and fire is about $5.7 million, and benefits are $11.8. So that combined with the market decrease is why you're showing the pension funds a decrease in that position, about $5 million each.
So your recommendation to our board would be to continue funding the pension as recommended by the actuaries?
Yes. Yeah, until you're 100% like you were years ago, I think you need to stay on the plan, whatever their plan was, to kind of get you fully funded at X date, because I think they are closed plans now.
Right.
But you're still going to have to fund them for a while before they're fully funded. And again, the market's a lot different today than it was at June 30, but you can't count on that all the time.
And the same for OPEB. Those contributions are equally as important.
Yes, I mean, what I do recommend, and again, without looking at the details of the plan, I don't know what you looked at is more just to start phasing out the benefits or capping them. So it doesn't have to be a phase out, but long-term medical claims and expenses are going to be tough to really completely fund unless at some point there's at least a cap on what the town is contributing, what the town is willing to pay as a benefit. So if there's a way to look at capping that at some point, that would be a recommendation to better be able to manage these.
I'm going to ask the other board members if they have questions for Mr. Centofanti.
Sure.
Lori?
Hi, Lori Charlton. Hi, Joe. Thanks for being
Oh.
here.
Sure.
Just to clarify the date that the draft financial statements would be available, you said if you get what you need this week, we would be looking at a draft of next Friday. Is that the 11th?
Yeah, whatever next Friday is. So yeah, worst case would be Monday, but my target would be Friday.
Okay. And so we're not meeting as a committee again this month. Can we just maybe talk about the process of how we get any comments or questions to you? Mary, I don't know if you had any thoughts, but I know that we wanted to have an opportunity to review the report and make sure we were okay with it before it was finalized. I just not clear how we're going to do that. Originally, that was supposed to be the purpose of this meeting, but the report's delayed. So, I guess it's a question or open for suggestions. Joe, what might be easiest for you to manage the process?
They certainly could send you a PDF of the report, or in some cases, if you want the hard copy, a lot of times it gets sent to town hall and then they can get you a hard copy. But then just kind of, we can either set up a call, which again, I don't know if that would count as a meeting, or you can just email me what the questions are. So at least I have a little prep time. It's easier if I kind of get them ahead of time and then can kind of look it up and then have a conversation if need be, regarding whatever the questions are.
Mary, I'm not sure about protocol. It'd be appropriate to just field more questions.
So in the past, we have had the other members funnel their questions through me, and then I would forward them on to Joe,
Okay.
if that works for everyone.
Works for me.
Joe, would that be acceptable to you?
Sure. Yep. That works.
Lori, did you have any other questions for Joe?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Jim, did you have any questions for Joe? Okay. So I think we're good for now. Any help that we can provide to or request from the town to get you those open items would be helpful, so we can get the draft and get the report finalized as soon as possible. Would be great.
Okay.
Hey Mary, this is Caitlin. Can I just, I'm sorry we got on late. So we missed the first couple of minutes. We missed the first couple of minutes of the meeting. I didn't think there was anything you were waiting on from the town side. I just wanted to confirm that.
Right. Well, the actual report is, I don't know if it's anyone's side, but the only other thing that's on our list for you is a transmittal letter.
Okay. Yep. So we received that today, and Jared and I are working on it.
Okay. And then I will need follow up on the legal at some point next week, but I'll let you know. Right now we're missing 4, but again, I think the due date, the request date was the response date of today. So we'll let you know on Monday who we didn't receive legal letters from.
Okay.
One of them is town attorney. So if you want to facilitate that tomorrow, we don't have James Baldwin's letter. So if you want to mention that one to him tomorrow, then if he could start working on that to get it to us next week, that would be helpful.
Okay, will do. I'll reach out to him.
Okay.
Mary, can I jump in?
Sure.
Caitlin, I don't know if you missed this at the beginning, but the suggestion came from Joe, on the Board of Ed OPEB information. I don't know if they missed a deadline or they didn't have one, but the suggestion would be to just, going forward, try to get a firm deadline in place with them, try to get that at the beginning of November or so that it doesn't hold up the financial statements. So something for the
So you're
future.
talking about a deadline from Hooker and Holcomb, or a deadline that Hooker and Holcomb imposes on the town and the Board of Ed to get them the info?
So whatever has to be done to get Hooker and Holcomb to get their report done earlier. I don't know what that's dependent on. I assume the town or the Board of Ed has to provide information to them to be able to do that work, but
Yeah.
Trying to manage that process so that they can have their report done earlier in the process was the suggestion.
Okay.
Were there any further questions for Mr. Centofanti? Okay. Well, thank you, Joe. We look forward to receiving the draft, and we will be in touch with you later on in December.
Okay. Great.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Okay. So item 4 on the agenda is to hear and consider and to elect officers for 2021. After I put this on the calendar, I was realizing maybe I jumped the gun. Jim, do you reappoint members in January? That was the only, I was concerned about the calendar and setting up meetings for 2021. That's why I put it there. But then afterwards, I realized we did that later in the year last year. And so I don't know when we do that process.
Generally at the beginning of the year. However, if you'd like to continue with this, Mary, I don't see the committee changing too much. I mean, maybe except for myself. But I think you plan on being on the audit committee, and I know Lori does. And so we would at least keep it with you too. So if you wanted to follow through with this, we certainly can. If you wanted to wait another month, we can do that as well.
I don't know. I'll put it out there to the board what everyone prefers to do. So do you plan to revisit the committees in January for all the committees?
Yes, for this committee, audit committee, budget committee, fund balance committee.
Okay.
Right.
So should we hold this over until the next meeting and just schedule the meeting for January?
So for January 5th?
Probably right.
Yeah, so January 5th is our Board of Finance meeting. However, this meeting will be at 6 and the Board of Finance meeting will be at 7:30. So it'll still be before our meeting.
Oh,
We
okay.
so we can certainly, yeah, we can certainly do this today.
Okay. Yeah, so that's what I think is at least schedule one more meeting so we can meet in January, and then we can do the rest of the housekeeping early next year in January, or maybe we'll need a meeting in February.
Okay.
So can I take a motion to table item number 3 until I'm trying to think, if we are you going to do that in January? So I guess we'd have to schedule a meeting in February too. So I think that would be okay. So can we make a motion to revisit item number 3 at a meet to be set in February?
Item number 4?
And item number 4, I think if we could make a motion to amend it. Oh, sorry, item number 4. Is so to make a motion to hear, consider, and elect officers for 2021. We'll make a motion to hold this over until February, for time to be determined.
Okay, I'll second that.
Are we, if that would be the only business in February, I would suggest to either do it tonight or do it at the January meeting. I think, if we don't expect a lot of, wholesale changes in the committee, I'm not sure it matters, but I'm neutral.
So what I can do, I understand what Lori's saying. What I can do is I can get these committees done via email, set them up via email between now and January. And that way we'll know who's going to be on what committee, who's going to volunteer for which committee before our January 5th audit meeting, subcommittee meeting. So what we can do, Mary, is push this off to January 5th, and what I'll commit to is to ensure that we have full committees by our January 5th Board of Finance meeting.
Okay, that works. All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, so can I have a motion to postpone item number 4 until our January meeting? Okay, Lori seconds. Okay, so now we'll move on to item number 5, which is to hear, consider, and adopt a meeting calendar for 2021. So we will schedule the meeting right now for January 5th, and we'll leave open the other meetings until after that meeting. And we know who's on the committee. So I will make a motion to amend item number 5 to hear, consider, and adopt a meeting calendar for 2021 to include January 5th, 2020, and the remainder of the meetings will be scheduled in January on January 5th.
Second.
And any questions, or can I have a second? All in favor? All right. And then item number 6, to hear, consider, and approve the following meeting minutes of September 1, 2020. That should have been in the packet. Does anyone have any questions or pertaining to the minutes, or I'll take a motion to approve the minutes? Lori? Are you making a motion to approve the minutes or a question?
Yes, I'll make a motion to approve.
Okay. Do I have a second? Jim? Okay. All in favor? Aye. So the minutes are approved. Okay. Item number 7 is a discussion of the audit subcommittee goals. I think if that's okay, we will postpone that till January. Can I take a motion to postpone that to January 5th? And then a second. All in favor? It passes. Okay. So now we're to item number 8, which is to hear and discuss an update on the status of the work completed by the town on the response to the Town of Fairfield Public Works Department review report on the results of procedures performed. And I see Mr. Bremer and Caitlin are there. I'm trying to see who else is in the room. Who would like to lead us through this?
I certainly can. Jared is here as well, and Connie is here as well.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Can I just make a suggestion, or if it's okay? Would it be okay if we go through these one at a time and ask any questions we have on each recommendation as we go through?
That question to me? I assume that's what we were going to do if that question is to me. So.
It was to Mary, but yeah, I hope that's okay with you too.
That's fine. That's fine because I believe Tom is going to guide us through this.
All right.
Yeah, I just assumed we'd go through one at a time, and I'll let you pick wherever you'd like to start.
Okay. Well, I think for the record, Tom, if you could give us an overview of the process that you went through, just so we have that for the minutes, and then we all did some reading over the weekend, and I'm sure we have lots of questions.
Okay. Well, as you probably all remember, we went through this. We got a working group together for the various departments: DPW, purchasing, finance, and assorted other people to the extent that they are affected by this. And we got a working group together, and we started not only compiling a draft purchasing policy, but we focused on these various recommendations. And to the extent the recommendations made sense, we either have already implemented them, or we are working on implementing them as we speak. So we put this response together, or the various responses together, really as a collaborative group, because frankly, no one person at the table would know enough about all the different departments to be able to answer these. So it was really a collaborative effort. I should add that on the DPW side of things, obviously, or maybe it's not obviously, but obviously to me, we sat down with the former head of DPW, Brian Carey, as well as Doug Novak, who's our department supervisor, to give us most of the input regarding actual DPW procedures. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we have a new interim head of DPW, and he started on Wednesday. I met with him for quite some time on Wednesday. He had already read this draft, this audit. He had not seen any of the recommendations. He was only given the audit, and he thought it was a good start for him to start learning the DPW department. That was, as I said, Wednesday. To the extent he may want to make changes to some of these recommendations when he gets more involved with his department. As I've said to him, we were pretty much down the path on these recommendations, but he certainly, I told him he certainly would have the right to make whatever changes he felt was necessary once he really understood what he was getting into with his DPW department. And I told him that what we would do regarding the Board of Finance is, however long that took, we would just update you on the various changes or whatever, and he would probably come before you and go through those changes with you as well. I don't mean to put words in his mouth, but I assume that's what he'd be more than willing to do. So having said that, as I said earlier, the recommendations were put together by a team. I've got part of that team here with me today. The team was a lot larger than the four of us sitting here, but we tried to respond to the various recommendations as best we could. As I said earlier, I think some of these recommendations really put for lack of a better word, don't really work in terms of what I'll consider the real world. But we can certainly go through these one at a time, and we can certainly answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tom, and we welcome, you know, every set of eyes we can get on this to improve our system. So I look forward to our new interim director of public works opinion and thoughts on these items. And I view it that it will always be a work in process, that there's always improvements that can be made as we test new things and try new things. So I think that approach that you have had is good, and okay.
I suggest that we start at the beginning of the report. He has references. There are references for each recommendation, but the beginning of the report starts with the reference is PW1A. So can we start there and just go in sequence?
Sure, we certainly can. We kind of our response, I've kind of put that more towards the end because it's such an overarching overview of things, and so you'll notice that's much more towards the end because certainly I felt, oh, this is going to be difficult to go through as the first thing, but we certainly can start there.
I think that would be helpful. Also, the thing we focused on was the priority. And so, for example, that first one was a priority recommendation characterized as a significant deficiency by the auditor. So, yeah, if we can go through in that order, I think that would just make it easier for us to track it. Thank you.
Sure, then that's fine. Well, I'm not going to start reading all the responses because we'll be here for a week. So
Yeah.
if you have any questions, I mean, you can see our response to the written procedures. I would also, I just want to add, and I don't mean to overstate the obvious, but, you know, when I see written procedures for everything under the sun, obviously it's very broad. We have developed a bunch of procedures in finance department, and I think we've tightened up a lot of those procedures, certainly since this was done. But other than that, I'll wait for your questions.
Okay, if I jump in, Mary?
Okay, Lori, would you like to start? Do you have?
Yeah, sure. So, Tom, just to respond to what you just said. So the recommendation is that written procedures be developed for all financial related and significant operational functions for each division, including administrative procedures. So I'm not sure I would characterize that as everything under the sun. I think it's significant procedures. But when I look at the response addresses only the finance department. And within the finance department, if I'm reading this right, it only addresses the payroll and accounts payable functions. So my question is, what about the other? There's certainly other significant functions in the finance department and in other departments. How did you think about those? I don't know if there were already procedures for those written, for example, on the monthly close and other things, but the response seems like it only addresses a small portion of the recommendation. So what's kind of the rationale for that, and what's left to be done is the first part of my question. And then the other part with regard to training, I think the report again was a little bit broader. It said that a number of employees, based on the interviews that were done, didn't have training for their positions, and the response addresses a MUNIS training that was done, but just a MUNIS training. So the response seems much more narrow and targeted than the recommendation. So I feel like the status is maybe that this is partially addressed, but there are still a number of, a number of things to be done. So let me just pause there and let you react to that.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct. I mean, in terms of the response, I mean, I think I'll ask Caitlin if there are other procedures that we need to beef up, if you will, in the finance group. I guess.
Not beef up, but what exists? I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think in my mind, there's a difference between creating a, procedure manual where none exists versus maybe beefing it up or tweaking it. So this one here, for just starting with finance, it addresses payroll and accounts payable. Are there written procedures for other functions within finance, or, for example, the monthly close, the budget process, et cetera? Do they already exist and they were sort of deemed to be adequate, or do they not exist?
I would say we have Munis manuals for all positions, which are really more of the how to use Munis in our current roles, but the actual processing thereof is more on the accounts payable and the payroll pieces, because there's so many processes involved in those pieces. The other functions being the budget function. As you know, we're in the midst of hiring a budget director, or starting to, and the job description really was a good starting point, actually, and Linda did leave a lot of her written manuals on how the whole budget process works. So we do have a budget manual as well. The other two functions are basically, mine is the controller, and there's an analyst. So we have within the analyst position a fixed asset book, because that's something that's a major part of her job. The rest of it is monthly procedures, journal entries related to investments, cash things. Again, a little bit, it's more Munis driven on how to do those things, as opposed to outside Munis.
So I guess, are you saying that we have then a complete set of finances, so that we created something for payroll and accounts payable, and the rest for finance was already there and is adequate?
Yeah, I would say within every job within finance has one. We also have internal policies related to, I'm not sure how many financial functions, maybe 6 or 7 or so, in terms of internal auditing documents as well, that pertain to bits and pieces of all of our positions. That's reviewed by the auditor through the audit process yearly.
Well, would it be fair to say, I don't mean to jump in, but would it be fair to say that a number of these procedures are really controlled by Munis? I mean, you go into Munis and you do whatever it is that you need to do. Munis is basically, you're following the path that Munis is laying out to complete the task.
Correct.
As opposed to, we have a manual on a shelf and you have to open it up and you turn to page 34 to tell you how to do X, Y, Z. We don't have any such manual. I assume we're just going to Munis and you follow the instructions and the training that you've had.
Right, and we've customized that to how we, how all of our jobs function within the finance department.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and Tom, I mean, respectfully, I realize we have the Munis manual, but for example, for the monthly close, if Caitlin were to, leave for some reason, would someone know how to close the books? Is there a list of, monthly closing procedures and standard journal entries and analysis that's done each quarter? I mean, that's what I'm talking about. More sort of, is there a checklist, a guide? I guess when I read Joe's comment that written procedures were not developed, that was how I took it, that we didn't have, we might have policies, but we didn't have procedures, so that if, someone new stepped into a role for whatever reason, they would have a guide on what gets done and how it gets done, which I think is a little bit separate from knowing how to use the system, right? So I know his recommendation was broad, but it sounded like not just for finance, but for, many departments, we didn't have stuff memorialized and we were maybe relying on institutional knowledge, which is, obviously a dangerous thing. When, you just bear the risk that people will leave and then you lose that. So again, what I would suggest maybe is within the response, we can sort of lay out what exactly we have and we don't have, maybe what's in place, what we created or improved as a result of the committee's work, and where perhaps we still don't have written procedures in other departments. I mean, I have no idea, you know, I don't know what the other departments have or don't have, but, or if everything's in one place. I know we have various policies and things, but I don't know if they're, you know, separate and you know, sitting in a drawer somewhere, or if they're kind of like in a book for someone.
I would be shocked if, in fact, we have written, not policies, but written procedures all laid out so that anybody could go in and be a budget director tomorrow. If they just open up the book, and if they have a rudimentary financial background, and they could just open up books and follow the policy, or follow the procedures. I would be shocked if we have such procedures all mapped out, not only in finance, but I would think finance more likely than any of the other departments. I mean, am I wrong?
No, I honestly, I think within the finance department, every person, because our tasks vary dramatically, from budget director to my job, to Connie's job, to Juliana's job. I think we all have individual procedures that we have. You know, are they all together? Are they all in a book? No. Do I have a checklist? Yes. Does Juliana? I know I've seen her checklist on capital assets, on her journal entries, and what she has to do every month. I have a checklist, what I do every month. And again, AP and payroll are a little different because there's multiple people doing them. And yes, there actually is a binder that you could see. Jared, you could probably speak to what that Linda left. There's binders of how
information
to
step by step how to build a budget. You know, starting in September, October, and yes, even going into Munis and which button to click to input the right data. So, but like Caitlin said, it's not, we don't have a single document, a single book that has all these things written down. I think we all kind of know what we're doing. And we do have a lot of it in writing somewhere, but it's not. We don't have it nicely compiled in a single document.
I mean, I guess I wouldn't expect that you have one document for the entire finance department, but typically you would expect to see it by function, right? So, Jared, you said there's something for the budget process
Yes.
that Linda left behind. And I guess I was more asking if we have the equivalent for, other finance processes. And it sounds like we sort of do, but I'm not really sure I can tell.
Yes, no, Connie, like we said, it's not all in one spot, but I'm comfortable that every position within finance right now has their own procedure manual.
Okay, so that just leaves then the other departments, and we didn't address that in the comment. And I'm just going to go back to the report for a minute, because I think the genesis of this comment, bear with me while I, there's a lot of, if you look at the audit report, there's a lot of different, they describe them as conditions, right, before the recommendations. So this particular one for PW1A, the way it's written, it says, again, for most of the divisions and functions, there are no written procedures. In addition, certain administrative employees noted that they did not receive adequate training regarding their job responsibilities when hired or transferred to the position. So that was the audit finding. And it sounds like we're probably in better shape in finance. But I'm just, again, referring back to that finding and asking, what we covered there. It sounds like we only addressed it as it relates to the finance department and didn't really address it as it relates to public works or the other other departments. So maybe
I think
in
that's fair.
terms of status, that's still open there. But I don't disagree with the comment. I don't think it's unusual to have procedure manuals. Certainly for operational procedures, I think it's very common. Maybe something that we didn't do, and we've just been relying on institutional knowledge. But I think everyone knows what the objective is, right? To make sure that there's a standardized way of doing things, that people know what they're doing, they can be trained, et cetera. And again, it sounds like here the feedback came specifically from employees who said, they got hired or put into a job and they didn't, get trained or really have something to look at. So I would take that seriously.
Oh, I think we are. And I think, in fact, you're absolutely right. We've noted that on a number of occasions that we have not done a very good job as a town over the years in terms of training our employees. There's no doubt. It costs money, and that's something that we haven't really attended to over the years. We haven't started to do a more aggressive munis training because we can do most of that in-house, which we are doing not only in finance but for other departments as well. And there's no doubt that we need to do more training. And we'll have to address that in the upcoming budget. But I mean, that's absolutely true. And
I hear you. I guess here's my only point was, Tom, I guess, and I hear everything you're saying, and you're right. This is where we are, right? And the point is to make it better. And I know we need to move on from this first item, but I guess what I would suggest, and I know Mary has passed on to you an Excel worksheet where we were going to try to use it to sort of track progress. I guess this first item, the response, it sounds like the response is you believe you've got this adequately covered in finance, but it doesn't sound like we've addressed this comment in any other department or function. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair because, well, and I started this not to be overly snarky, but to have written procedures for all the different departments, A, would take an enormous amount of time, and B, as I said earlier, I'd be shocked if they really had that. And yes, there's no doubt in my mind that a number of the departments here rely heavily on institutional knowledge, historical knowledge of the current employees. And as much as I don't like that, and I think you're absolutely correct, that is not something that's desirable if there's another way to do it. I just think it's going to require a sea change in terms of the cultures of the different departments, as well as it's going to create an enormous amount of time it's going to be required to actually sit down and start writing what the tree warden does, just to pick one department, and how does he go about doing it and that sort of thing. I'm not saying it's not something the town should not consider or doesn't consider, but you're absolutely right. We have not broached that to the other departments because, frankly, I think it's a very big task that I don't know how to approach it at this stage because it's really going to require, in my view anyway, a tremendous amount of time and money to try to do that, which is fine. It's just we just haven't done that yet.
Well, maybe we can, again, I know we have to move on, but from the working group's perspective, maybe, the finance department, since it sounds like they have done it, has some suggestions. Perhaps it's part of an employee's goals for the year or the first quarter to, get something down on paper in terms of a certain job function, and those get consolidated somehow. I mean, this is, I don't know about, it certainly will take time. I'm not sure about money. I think if, again, I don't know how it was done in finance aside from the Munis manual, but it sounds to me like there should be a plan to address it and to ask employees or supervisors or department heads or whatever, to figure out how they get that done, for each group. So again, I'll move on. I'll let somebody else ask questions, but I would just suggest the response is the response, and we've got some things covered, but I would consider the comment still partially open, and hopefully we can, you know, just have an update next time as to what the plan is. You know, I mean, we weren't expecting that all these things would get addressed in a month. You know, these are some pretty significant comments, and something like that, I think, you know, could take many months. You know, people would work on it a little bit at a time, but I think there should be a plan around it if we intend to address it. So I'll leave it at that.
Could I ask a follow-up question on, since we were talking about job procedures and things, one that I had a question on was on page 35 of the report that involved accounts payable. And that was that Munis does not require it allows invoices to be paid without receiving reports. And so in the notes, it says that there's a new policy that instructs the accounts payable people not to pay the invoices without checking to make sure they have the receiving reports. But do we have a process in place that flags those type of situations that don't get receiving reports, so that at some point there's another layer of scrutiny on those invoices?
So, Mary, this is Caitlin. The way that Munis works is that it's an optional functionality. Not every, like I think it's Westport or Norwalk, they don't use the receiving functionality within Munis. So it's not something we could make a requirement in Munis, and we've called Tyler Technologies. It's not like a setting where you could say there needs to be a receiving record or there doesn't. So okay. Some municipalities require it and some don't. We require a receiving record within Munis to pay the invoice. In addition to, on the invoice itself is the PO number written and acknowledged by somebody that's been received. But our internal policy is if there's not a receiving record, we do not pay it if it's a PO related invoice. We actually kick it back to the department.
Okay. Okay, so I thought there was still some kind of process where that was being done, but that's good. Thanks.
And not to go on about this, but there's no invoice field within the receiving record. So a lot of times we receive partially, and so there's multiple receiving records on one PO. And without having that unique invoice number field, so what we do is we mandate the people, the receivers in the various departments to actually key in the invoice number into like a text box so that we can validate that the invoice numbers match as well. So there is a level of checks and balances that do go on, and people know, because we'll just send them back through inter-office mail, and after 3 or 4 times of that happening, because then that delays the process, so we cut checks once a week. They might miss that week, actually. So it's kind of a big deal to them, and everybody knows that that's the process. So there is checks and balances with that receiving functionality within Munis and within the department.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Go to W1B. I'll ask my question just to move things along. So I was a little bit confused on this. So the finding here was that I'll just read the finding. There does not appear to be clearly defined job descriptions and job responsibilities for administrative positions. And the recommendation is that formal job descriptions be developed. And the response says that the HR department maintains written job descriptions for all town employees, and they update them as positions open. So it implies that either the recommendation is not correct or that it's been addressed, but I feel like we heard something very different, particularly as we had the VERIP discussions, that this was, an issue that needed to be addressed, that job descriptions were 20 years old and hadn't been updated, and that it was going to be a project to get them done. So I was a little bit confused by the response. It sounds like, is this still a work in process, or where, how should we read this?
I think it's still a work in progress. I don't think they maintain all the job descriptions, but some of them are very much out of date. And no, they're not sitting there rewriting them all today because they can't. They physically are not able to because of all the other work they're doing. So I think the idea is that they're going, as every position is open and we go out to hire a new budget director, for instance, we took the old job description for budget director, and that's been completely redone so we can hire a new budget director. And I think the plan is to, for every new job opening that we have, to make sure that when we hire or we go out to hire a new person, that the job description for that position has been completely rewritten and updated. And normally, I would think that would take a very long time for obvious reasons in terms of, in order to get new job descriptions written. But I think with the I'm hoping with the voluntary early retirement program, which is going to have a number of people, as well as our usual number of people leaving, that the job descriptions will be updated more rapidly than I otherwise would think. And I'm also thinking things like, I don't know, if we have to hire a laborer for DPW, well, we hire, or there are maybe 10 or 20 of those in town. I'm making numbers up, but there are a number of them in town. And so one job description will fit a number of those people. So I think that's the thought. I think we're trying to minimize the workload that's going to require to try to respond to some of these recommendations. In terms of just the purely paperwork that's going to be required and that sort of thing.
So is there a date? We're looking. I mean, do we have a goal, like a date that we're going to get this done within a year? I mean, that just sounds very open-ended. So how do we know when this is addressed? I completely agree. It's going to be an effort to try and get this done. I thought there were other reasons for job descriptions in terms of, performance management processes as well. But I mean, are we, so this is still open in my mind, right? So is there a target date here? Or if not, can we add a target date for this to be complete? A year, 6 months, whatever's appropriate based on the level of effort involved. Because otherwise, I just don't know how to go back. How would you ever go back to it and determine that it was done? I mean, I feel like there should be a date here on all of these that are in process, and maybe that just requires some thought. I'm not suggesting that everything's going to get done in a month, but
no, I can tell you it won't. No, I have no problem with adding a date, but I guess what I would prefer to do in terms of trying to make it a realistic date, I first want to see if the voluntary early retirement program goes through. If that goes through, then I think it's a date, and I'd want to talk to Mr. Hazelkamp in HR because that's going to be the department that's responsible for this. As I said earlier, I think if the voluntary retirement goes through, then I think the date would be more doable, I think, and earlier. If the voluntary early retirement doesn't go through, then I think it's going to be substantially longer. But I have no problem with adding a date. It doesn't bother me at all. But I'll have to, I need to talk to Mr. Hazelkamp to get a realistic sense from him as to when this task can be completed.
That's totally fair. I would just say that, if the VERIP does go through and we find ourselves with 15 job descriptions that need to be written in a month, then, why take 6 months to write them if it doesn't go through? So, again, I would say if there's a date there and we want to get it done in 3 months or 6 months, then that's just the goal to measure the progress against. So, I mean, that's up to the committee to figure that out. But, I think.
Well, remember there are 450 employees. And so if there's 450 employees, I'm going to guess there's probably at least 300 job descriptions. So, and I'm going to also guess that most of those job descriptions are woefully out of date. So even if half are, that's 100 and some odd job descriptions. So it's a pretty big task, and I don't think it's going to be done very quickly. But as I said earlier, if the voluntary thing goes through, then I will, I can push for an earlier completion date. Let's leave it at that.
Great. So maybe next time for the next update, we can just sort of revisit the date. And again, if it's, 10 a month that get done, or, half of them get done in 6 months, whatever it is. I mean, that's up to you guys to figure out based on the resources that you have. But I think if there's not a plan to address it in a date, it's one of those things that'll just be easy to leave it open forever. Because there's always going to be
10 years. 10 years, we'll get it done. Right.
Yeah, right. That's why our job descriptions are 20 years old right now, because there's never been a plan to update them, I think. So, okay.
Yep, I agree.
I know, Mary, or did anyone else have questions on that item, PW1B?
No, I think.
Seemed a little bit, it was related. It said, the comment is there's no formal internal reporting process or other management reporting procedures. I wish Joe was here. Not exactly, because again, that's a broad statement. But the response here says that the director of DPW is coordinating with the superintendent of public works on creating detailed written policies and procedures. So it sounds like what we talked about in the first comment they're doing. And I guess my question is, so it sounds like it's in process somehow, or maybe the plan has changed given that we've had a change in personnel there. But again, if you could maybe get back to us on that one with the expected completion date, that would be helpful.
Sure.
And probably on all of them. I mean, in the tracker that Mary sent over, I think we had a column in there for date, just sort of a target date to help manage it. If you want to use that, that might be helpful, but we'll follow along with it. I feel like I'm the one doing all the talking here. I don't know, Mary or Jim, do you have questions on the next one? PW1D. This is the one about cash being sent to the divisions instead of directly to finance.
Which page are you on, Lori? Are you on 6 of the report, 62? Is that?
I have the original report, but it's PW1D is the audit report reference.
Okay, so you're on the formal job description still. That's what. Okay.
Now the next one, the
next one, formal internal reporting.
The comment, the finding is that checks are being sent to divisions instead of being sent directly to the finance department. And the recommendation was that all cash receipts should be mailed directly to the finance department.
No.
So.
Yeah, they've implemented.
I mean, I had a question on that, but I wanted to let you or Jim jump in if you have a question first.
Okay. You can keep going.
I don't know if it's Tom or Caitlin or maybe Connie. The response is that finance established a policy in February 19, and it was updated in October 2020, where only customer credit card payments are accepted by DPW. It says they're processed through the rec track system. Scrap metal checks are mailed directly to finance, and there's a reconciliation done. So that was the response. And I guess my question was, it sounds like there was a policy developed in February 19th, but it just got updated last month. And what exactly was the policy revision that was made? What was it that what was wrong with the policy we put out on February 19th, and what needed to be modified there to kind of address this comment? I couldn't tell from the response.
Hi, Lori, this is Connie. Yes, back in February 2019, we only had checks being submitted to the finance department for deposit from DPW operations. However, with updated technology and the acceptance of credit cards, we were able to coordinate most recently with the recreation department through the RecTrack system of allowing customers to pay for DPW related items with a credit card through the RecTrack system. So therefore, there would be no exchange of cash or checks. Further, what most recently happened down at the solid waste and recycling facility now with the scrap metal is they have a dumpster there where scrap metal is now placed in the dumpster. It's weighed at a periodic basis by the scrap hauler, and a check is mailed directly to the finance department. Whereas in the past, the employees were bringing the scrap metal directly to the facility in Bridgeport. They're no longer doing that. The scrap metal is now being placed in a dumpster directly at the solid waste and recycling facility. So that's why it was updated in October 2020, because we did apply the acceptance of credit cards and the use of the RecTrack system.
Got it. So, and can you just help me understand what kinds of credit card payments does DPW take? Like what do people go and
well,
I'm
people
sorry,
are buying trees. There's tree planting program that they have initiated, and people do buy quite a few trees and have them planted at their homes. Also, in the past, they rented picnic tables and barricades. However, now they have limited that, and it's only being rented for civic events versus being rented to the public. So that's all going through the RecTrack system now.
DPW doesn't take cash payments for anything at this point?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay.
Not big.
No.
All right.
None of these numbers, just so you know, Lori, none of these numbers have ever been big. These are not big numbers, and they never have been.
Yeah, we noticed that on some of them. I guess the question you always have is, around completeness, like if the number's small, how do you know it shouldn't have been bigger? The question is if all the cash that comes in is actually getting to the finance department and being deposited, right? So, so this is a good change with the credit cards. And I guess the policy that was written, where does that policy sit, Connie? Like when this policy gets written, right? Where does it end up in terms of, we've been talking about policies and procedures manuals. Where does that, sit? Is it a DPW policy? Is it finance policy? How do people keep track of this and know it's operational?
Right. Whenever I write a policy that affects town departments, it is submitted directly to each department head. And I request that the department head share that with their employees. Also, it's posted on what we call the town share drive, which is accessible to all employees to review. And also, I have departments sign off on a last page of the document to show that they acknowledge that they have read the document, they understand it, and will abide by the terms of the policy.
On the town share drive, for example, if you were to go in there, are all the DPW policies in one place?
There is a folder that's called Policies, and employees can click on that folder and open it up, and it will have each policy by name in that folder.
Is it segregated by the department or by function within the town?
No, pretty much when I establish policies, it's mostly townwide, but as a result of this audit, I have developed some department-specific policies, but if they are all designated by the title of the policy. For example, it'll say credit card payments, you know, petty cash receipts, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if there are department-specific ones, it sounds like at least you've got some of the makings of your policy and procedures manual for DPW, right? All right, so it sounds like this one is complete, right? This one we can sort of check off as complete.
Yes, and many times departments, if they're uncertain or they don't know where to find it, they'll call me and I email them a copy of the policy.
Next comment was, again, a very broad one. I'm assuming this came up as a result of interviews that were done during the audit, but the finding was that there were no staff meetings being held to communicate and update employees, and the recommendation was that the department implement periodic staff meetings to communicate and update employees. And presumably the reason that came up as an audit comment was that, you know, part of what gets communicated during staff meetings is procedural things that we're talking about here, right? So the response says that staff meetings are now being conducted for DPW employees by the Director of Public Works, by the Superintendent of Public Works on a weekly basis. So I guess, is that still going on now in light of the changes? And just curious what type of items get covered during these meetings? I mean, are we, for example, these audit results, right? And what's being done to address them? Are those things on the agenda for DPW employees in these meetings?
Well, I've been working with the Superintendent of Public Works, Doug Novak, and he sends me an agenda. And he also sends me minutes of every weekly meeting that he conducts. He conducts with his department staff, and they discuss all the DPW-related matters that are important for the week. And he also posts the minutes also in the public recreation room there. And he's been emailing at me every week and showing me his minutes, and it's been successful.
And I would also add to that, when this was brought to the DPW attention of both the superintendent and the director at the time, they pushed back very hard on this, saying, "What are you talking about? We were having meetings all the time." And I said to them, basically, it's one thing to have a meeting with 3 or 4 people, and it's another thing to have a meeting department-wide or a full staff meeting. And so you need to make things more formalized. I didn't realize what Connie just said. I wasn't aware of that. He was actually sending minutes every week, which of course makes me think, my God, he's not that busy. But be that as it may, I'm glad he's doing it, and I think it's.
Well, they're bulleted minutes. Don't think I'm not getting Moby Dick every week, but I'm getting bulleted minutes of the basic points and highlights of the meeting.
Good.
Yeah, good. I mean, hopefully they're going over some of the, the changes that are coming out of these recommendations, and they're, they have follow-up items in there, et cetera. So that's good to hear. Thank you for that. The next item, and again, I'm just going in order here. So PW1F, I'm going to suggest we hold off on that. This is, well, actually it's broad, but it makes reference to the purchasing policy. So the finding says employees lack adequate training on town policies and procedures. Again, same theme, but it says most notably the purchasing policy. And I know there's a response here, but I think given that the purchasing policy is going to get revisited, or the draft is, we're talking to Joe about that. Why don't we just hold off on that, right? Because any training obviously will have to be done when the policy's finalized.
Well, absolutely, but I also would add to that you're absolutely right. When the policy is finally, whatever the policy is, and it's finalized, obviously there'll be some training that's required with different employees. On the other hand, we've recognized that the current policy, which is all of 3 pages long, is certainly incomplete. So we've already started to make a number of changes to get closer to the policy draft that we sent. We've already started that process, and we're going to continue that process because a lot of what we're telling our people to do, I am sure will be encapsulated within the new policy, just because we need to move in that direction. So we're doing that as well. But you're absolutely right. As far as the final training, if you will, on the purchasing policy, we have to wait for that to be completed, and we will.
Sort of open for the moment, or to be revisited. I guess, the next one is similar employees lack adequate training on the use of Munis. And just reading the response here, just one question. And so it says finance provided hands-on Munis training in payroll and accounts payable to all DPW employees. The second training was offered again, let's see. I guess my question was, so we talk about DPW here and training them on Munis. And I guess my question was, what about other departments? Was there anything done with other departments, or was that already in place? Or do other departments need to know Munis? I'm not sure.
The other departments are so much smaller, and we deal with maybe a handful of employees at even police and fire. There's 1 or 2 people that do it. So that's really more individualized. Like if they have questions or need anything, it's really more of a one-on-one situation than a formal training scheduled where we have laptops set up and there's a screen and where we go step by step.
But I think I'd like to add to this too. What I'm realizing as I'm reading this response is what I've learned about Munis, and I am not a Munis expert by any means, but what I've heard at least 100 times through different employees is if you don't use Munis often, you lose the ability to use Munis. And so what this is off the top of my head, but looking at this, that yes, we've added training, and yes, we've gone down to DPW people, but I'm also thinking that we need to do even more. I would say that maybe every 6 months, maybe even 3 months, just review the items with the various people in DPW particularly, so that they don't ever feel like they have lost their ability to use Munis, I guess is the best way to put it. That if they need additional training, we should continue to offer that every 6 months or so.
And the training material, having the training materials that they can refer to would be helpful. I was sort of keying in on the last sentence of the response where it says future Munis trainings will be provided to all town employees on an ongoing basis. So I wasn't sure, we addressed DPW, but it looked like an open item for other town employees. So I was just more wanting to understand the timeline and the status of that piece.
That piece, it's Caitlin again, Lori. Most of the times where we really kind of focus on training is when we upgrade. If we have any Munis upgrades, is really, especially if there's little nuances that change within the payroll or AP functionality by the end user, we really have significant training sessions when we upgrade, which is maybe, depending on if it's a major upgrade or minor upgrade. It could be yearly, it could be, we haven't done a major upgrade in maybe 2 or 3 years, but there is one coming up. So that will then kind of make way for a larger training session. But that's really what that comment is pertaining to, is the upgrades and then any future training that we need to do for the end user for any upgrades within the Munis system.
Closed out then?
Hey, I'm sorry, you cut out. Say that again?
I'm sorry, is this comment completed or the response completed? Because I think what you've described, Caitlin, is, just future training when upgrades happen, et cetera. That's just in the normal course. So it sounds like the training that you've done already was done on a more in-depth basis with DPW and addressed the issue that was raised. Is that fair?
Yes, we had a DPW training that was specific to DPW. We also trained any other person who wanted to go back in July. So yes. Which was the comment in parentheses, the Munis training sessions were also provided to other town departments. So whoever wanted to come was able to come, but we had a DPW specific training prior to that.
I'll just keep going. The next one was, this one, it's PW1H. And the finding says for the majority of the divisions, the work order system software is not used to assign and document work performed. The recommendation, the town's work order system software should be used to assign and document work performed. So in reading the response, it says the Q Alert work order system currently used is not meeting the DPW garage's expectations. We're seeking replacement software. We're researching other options. So that's sort of an open there. What would you say the expected timeline to that is? Is that something for this upcoming budget year that we should expect to see, or what are your thoughts on that?
And we may have it in the upcoming budget. I'd like to see us do something before the budget, frankly. The Q Alert system, there's a lot of complaints about it, and it doesn't really work for us. But it's really the only system that we have now where we can actually deal with the public's complaints and that sort of thing. So we've been looking back and forth. We've been looking back and forth for new systems, but I'd like to get it in during this fiscal year. I don't want to wait another, till July or something like that. So I'm hoping that we can do that in this year's operating budget, but that's an open issue. And, certainly by our next meeting on this subject, I'll have a better sense of when we think we can actually get a new system involved. And I also want to talk about the new DPW guy and see if he likes the Q Alert systems. The last one didn't, and maybe the new one does. I don't know.
But I have a follow-up comment to that, Tom, and that is, as you go through the budget and put that together, if there are items that are recommendations from this report, is there a way to list them and provide us extra detail that that's what you're addressing in it, so we know when we go through budget season?
Sure. I think we can put some. It'll have to be. It's not going to be. Well, it'll have to be aside from the budget as well. We'll have to do some additional documentation.
Either in the comment section or somewhere, or just like a separate schedule of, these are things that we'd like to implement because of this report.
We'll work on that. I'm sure we can do something like that.
Okay. And then we're kind of running out of time. So, Lori, do you want to wrap up, and then we can continue this in January?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the same thing. So there were 75 recommendations. We discussed the first 8. So we knew this would take a few meetings, but we'll, thank you for the responses. And I guess what I would just say is, again, Mary sent a tracker along. What would be great is if we have, a little bit of clarity on, whether this is done, it's in process, and if it's in process, expected date of completion. That way, if we know something has an expected date of completion of 9 months from now, we're not going to ask you about it every time, right? Because we know it's something that is down the road. So.
Oh, yes, you are, but that's okay.
No, we won't, I promise. All right, but that was it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So then the final item on our agenda is to hear and consider and act upon any communications. I do not have any unless anyone else does. So I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second? All in favor? Aye. Okay, the audit committee meeting is now adjourned. You expanded the English channel to 60 miles.